Hello, and welcome to The Smiling Human, where collectively we evolve through inquiry. Hello, everyone watching and listening. Today I had the pleasure of speaking with Anja Rose. Anja Rose is a dedicated love, sex, and relationship coach specializing in trauma support and nervous system healing. Her work is deeply rooted in the principles of sacred feminine embodiment and offers a tantric lens to healing as well as transformation. As a feminine embodiment practitioner and shamanic facilitator, Anja offers holistic healing approaches that empowers individuals to navigate their personal and relational challenges with grace and resilience. She's committed to guiding her clients towards deeper connections, self-awareness, and healing, all in the service to authentic feminine leadership and sacred embodiment. Our conversation spans a variety of topics around the reclamation of feminine power, power of story, and tuning in to the locus of the body to come into deeper presence and openness. I hope you enjoy. Awesome. Anja, thank you so much for being here. I'm very excited to showcase your wisdom and experience. I know that we've shared some history and some explorations together in the past, and I'm very excited to showcase that. So thanks for being here.
Pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So out the gate, I'd love to know, what is the last thing that made you smile?
I'm smiling right now just at the the remembering, I guess, of our time together and how long it's been. And even though we have been sharing dialogue online, for a little while now, just like seeing your face, I'm just like, oh yeah, Oak, like it's so nice to see you. So that's making me smile.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's lovely. Thank you. Thank you. I didn't plan that for listeners. That wasn't scripted, just to make me look good.
No. Yeah.
And so the listeners would have heard a little bit about what you do now and where you've come from. I think I would love to know, being that you've transformed your offerings and your wisdom teachings since the last time we spent time together, how is it that you found yourself in this position? How did you come to be doing what you're doing now?
Thank you. Gosh, it's been such a huge journey of allowing myself to be seen and like claiming my medicine, claiming my gifts, claiming my sensuality, and being seen in that has been quite terrifying. And I don't know if that's ancestral and it's this life that I'm experiencing, fear of being seen. But, I've been kind of quietly on my spiritual awakening journey for 10 years now. And a lot of what I'm doing now, I really got reawakened to when I was 18, but I didn't have the structure, the energy body to hold all of that information, all of that download. And so I kind of, slowly plodded along, learning and learning and learning until I really kind of committed to some kind of, spiritual journey at 21. And yeah, it's just been 10 years of really claiming who I am. And that's been interesting because none of the labels have felt true or felt like they've truly embodied what I feel like I am. And it's so much more than just the labels that I have on my Instagram or however I try to identify, has always just felt like I'm putting myself in a box. And yeah, so at the moment, I guess where I am is just really claiming what my idea of what it means to be feminine really is, and to really remember our rights as a feminine being. And I know this plays out in masculine feminine polarity, but what it means for me to be a feminine woman who really claims to be a woman. And it's really reclaiming my rights to ritual and ceremony and rites of passage that remind me how powerful my body, my wisdom, my womb is, and how powerful the feminine oracle really is. And through that, I've kind of picked apart all these amazing tools from all the different lineages that I've learned from, and realizing that there's just not one way, there's just so many ways. And so how can we integrate the breath, movement, meditation, self-inquiry, shamanic ritual and ceremony into the way that we live our lives and realize that our whole life becomes a ceremony because of that. We're constantly being initiated into new ways of being, to how to better ourselves, how to evolve. And then I really like to lay that over in how we relate, not just with ourselves, but in partnerships, and how we want to bring that into, divine union. And that's a part of my life's mission, is really calling in the reclamation for the masculine and feminine, but male and female energetics as well, and how we can, relate in a way that is beyond what we've been seeing. And yeah, I think that's a long-winded version of that. There's so much more.
Of course. Thank you. In receiving that, I hear the central piece both in what you've spoken and as well as what shows up in the choice words on your Instagram and other media pieces around this idea of claiming or reclamation. And I want to hold
Mm-hmm.
this here as well, because I'm quite curious, knowing that this season is about meaning, and I've brought you and other very powerful women on to speak about meaning from this lens of the feminine, from the female perspective. When,
Mm.
maybe I'm tempted to say, oh, well, what does it mean to be a woman? But I feel like that might be a bit of a grab. I'm more curious to explore the idea of claiming or reclaiming, particularly, and I'll preface this and then I'll pass this back off to you, that when I encounter and engage with the idea of meaning, it is relational. And I appreciated that you spoke about bringing these into union, into relation as well, because as
Mm.
far as I understand it, and as far as I've experienced it, meaning is the experience of relating with truth. And
Yeah.
so when we're speaking about what does it mean to claim or to reclaim, I guess this would be my question to you. In your experience and in your work, as it relates to that which is known to be feminine, that which is truly feminine, what does it mean
Mm.
to reclaim those energies?
Mm. Mm. Thank you. Yeah, beautifully put and well thought. Yeah, what does it mean to reclaim those energies? It's really redirecting the energy of how we've been brought up to believe we are one as a woman, and what it means to be a woman, and then what is feminine energy. And I think they're both different experiences. And so reclaiming for me is really claiming my sexuality and my sensuality from a place of wholeness. It's sexuality, and particularly for women, has been really, I guess what's the right word, like manipulated and bastardized for a lot of what we've seen, in our current evolution. And so the way that we've related to ourselves as beings, as women, has often been as an exchange. Like, I'm here to serve men and to bring them babies and to be a good housewife and to, kind of be quiet. And the power restructure has been amazing, which is why we kind of saw the feminist movement really come in, which needed to happen. But what happened when that happened is that it didn't teach men how to contribute and where their place was in the world. And so I'm not a feminist. I often see myself as an anti-feminist, because I believe in empowering and re-empowering men to know how to show up in the world, because they're only as good as their fathers, or the masculine leaders they've had in their life, or their past relationship. And so a part of the reclaiming as a woman is, how can we still be powerful and independent and intuitive, and that not be a threat to mankind, but it can be a liberation for mankind, and it can be celebrated, not feared. And the reclaiming, and a part of that, it's really wobbly right now, and it's supposed to be, because we have, hundreds and thousands of years of it being so out of balance. And that's what a part of we're seeing as the reclaiming, and particularly in the sacred sexuality realms, it blew up because all of these women suddenly discovered their sexual essence, and it got really wild and untamed. And now that's beautiful and great, but also a lot of women get stuck in that and realize that's just the root chakra, or that's just the sacral chakra, that's the lower energies. They're not grounded in that, and they haven't actually learned how to bring that energy up through the spine into the body and, kind of connect to consciousness. And with that, for me, that is divine union of the self, creating the microcosmic orbit through the body. It also invites us to learn how to use that energy, not just from our sexuality, but from our heart, from our throat, and from our oracle. And really, that's a part of this whole idea. We see these terms like the feminine rising. That's my idea of the feminine rising, is really learning how to use our sexuality from the heart, not from just our sex, not using it for manipulation, not using it just to find the husband or to be a good wife or just to have babies like this. And maybe that is just your life purpose, is just to be a mother, and that's beautiful and divine. But we can still learn how to use this energy in a way that is creating like a higher state of consciousness for everyone. It welcomes the masculine or the men into our lives. It teaches us how to move from the heart and from our oracle. And so that reclaiming for me really comes down to reclaiming that sexual essence and realizing that it is more just our sex, it is also our heart and our consciousness that we are reawakening and learning how to stabilize and root it down. That when we move from this place, from the heart, that is where our most, like, I guess, divine or beautiful or high state of consciousness comes from. And people really want to meet us in that place. It feels authentic, it feels pure, and not because we need to have a purity complex at all. But I'm really kind of working with myself in this way and working with other women in this way, is like, we're more than just our sex. And I think that's really where I wanted to go with that reclamation. There's so much more to that, but I'll pause there.
The word that comes to mind in receiving that is vitalization or revitalization, and recognizing that that which makes man and makes woman is at the base sex-based. It's a biological difference. And I think that the layers that you're weaving on top of this is the recognition that, if I'm hearing you correctly, is that that which is feminine, or the feminine sex, the feminine sexual essence, is no different than life, or this life force, because you spoke about chi, or the chakra systems within the yogic traditions. And this broadening of the realm to recognize that that which we claim to be sexuality as this exchange of, to be reductive, and forgive me, audience, but bodily fluids for a short period of time for nothing more than pleasure, is so reductive and exclusionary of the capacity of this element of our humanity to be transformative, not only for the individual, but for the collective. And on that note, I wanted to touch on a piece that you mentioned about independence. I heard you mention independence, and how do we be independent, and this sort of piqued my curiosity, because I've been butting up against this idea of independence, not in so far as I reject it for dependence, but rather I feel there might be this, madhyamika, the third path, the middle path of interdependent. And this is where the piece of union comes in, where it's not about women being empowered and separate. What I'm hearing is that there's this pathway that you're exploring and really ushering and mentoring other women through, that in touching down into this ever-present life energy that expresses itself as sexuality, that expresses itself as sensuality, as creativity, as emotion, as life, vitality, speech, all of these things, that we end up coming into contact with avenues of service. And I say service, and I want to really emphasize that, because you did say service in a different context, and I want to delineate the two. When you were speaking about the past stories about how it is to be a woman, what it means to be a woman, and how this was in service to, I might even say subjugated to, or submitted to, under the needs of men or the needs of society. When I think of service, I want to elevate that into this interdependent space, to say that what I'm hearing is that when these old restrictive and reductive stories are shed and communion is reached inside oneself, that
Mm.
that gift of life, that vitalization becomes possible to share with others in ways that actually elevates the community. Have I understood
Yeah,
you correctly?
absolutely. Yeah, beautifully, beautifully. Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious, since we're speaking about meaning and we're speaking about definitions in some sense have a lot to do with meaning, I'm curious to hear perhaps maybe from your own perspective or what you notice as being some of the larger or more prominent stories that come up with the women that you work with that tend to be
Mm,
the blocks to this reclamation process or this vitalization. What do you see?
mm, thank you. Yeah, it seems to be consistent across the board so far, including within my own, my own being and my own self exploration. It's really so women come to me because they're usually in partnership and they want to have like better sex and they want their partner to listen to them and they want to, have better orgasms and all of this amazing stuff. And most of the time, they can't even look at themselves in the mirror. Like they hate themselves, basically. They don't know how to love themselves. They're literally expecting their partner to do it for them. When he changes, when he shows up, when he does all of this, then I'll have X, Y, and Z. Yes, in some contexts, it's a collaboration, and when safety and communication and reciprocity is in exchange, then absolutely, when you're in partnership, these are some of the core things that really allow you to both have this beautiful, divine, cosmic, orgasmic experience. But for these women who are listening to this, is like you can't wait for him to bring you the pleasure. You have to find and discover that for yourself. And I think that's where the word independence comes from, and then reclaiming, coming back into interdependence, is a woman needs to realize that there's so much self-work she needs to do in order to self-discover, self-realize, because this man will never be able to meet you if you don't even know, like, the way, understand the way that you like to be touched, that you like to feel celebrated, or that you like to give pleasure to yourself or joy. And so it really starts with the self. And I believe this is what I really want to like bring in the key for women, is that if you want a man to meet you there, you have to know how to meet yourself there first. And once again, I don't think this is the rule, because I do see partners come together who are, for the lack of a better word, broken in their own ways. And they kind of come together and they bring these two pieces that they were both missing, and then they rise together. And I think that's a part of what the idea of divine union is that you're not supposed to be perfect, whole, and complete. You come together and then you can both lift each other up on the way there. And you're both choosing this pathway of devotion with as much consciousness as you can. The other side of that, though, is that has seemed, from what I observe, quite rare to have two partners fully committed and devoted to that. We're seeing an awakening of this, absolutely, particularly on social media, but it is rare that I meet in person couples who are really on that path. And so we can't wait for that person to meet us there. We have to start with the self. And yeah, the numbness I see, the disassociation, the disconnection from their own sex, their own sexuality, and the amount of shame, trauma, sexual trauma that holds someone from being able to experience pleasure it's just, I would say it's like 90% of the women that I work with. And so the journey that I end up taking women on is often like, we don't even get to exploring, I guess, like pleasure and sexuality in the way of like orgasm until like week 10. And only then, after we've done the basics, inner child work, releasing family dynamics, unprocessed trauma, only then do they even wake up a little bit to like want to even move and be in their bodies for it to be safe enough to invite sexual or like a deeper sexual energy or exploration into the space. And I'm just seeing that. I'm just like, wow, like this is profound how long it takes. And that can take years. for a woman to even get to that amount of safety to explore her sexuality in a safe way. So I don't know if that answers your question.
What I'm hearing is that the process of externalizing the source of connection and source of discovery is this major roadblock. That is to say, my partner will do it for me, or the world will do it for me, or, if this happens, then I will have that which I need. And sort of circling around this point, it's almost baked in, from at least my perspective, it's baked into our, might call it the psychosexual dynamic of humanity, because our sexuality is fundamentally relational, right? It is how we relate to make more of us and so many other things. And so when you're speaking about this aspect of constantly seeking external to oneself, I wonder how it is, and maybe this is not something that you can answer, but I'm so curious to see, it's not that the relational aspect needs to be removed. It's almost as though this reclamation process is identifying what parts come from the outside and what parts come from the inside, and how is it that we actually
Mhm.
meet up in this way. And particularly when you were speaking about the role that family dynamics and trauma plays into it, well, for those who have incurred sexual trauma, which is a very, very high number of people, that is an external source of pain. It's an external marring, right? It's literally marring from another onto this relational aspect of ourselves. And the
Mm.
way that that can shape the psyche, the emotional body, one's capacity to feel safe or open is, well, it can't really be understated. There's a lot of very brilliant and maybe more competent people to be speaking on it than I. Trauma therapist Gabor Mate comes to mind, right? People like this. And so understanding this, then, that there is necessarily a relational element to it, that this misplaced externalization can be one of the major roadblocks to this reclamation process. What is it that you could offer to some of the women listening, maybe something they can do for themselves at home, that can
Mm.
help to unweave this externalized process and help them come into greater contact with this energy in themselves?
Mm. Mm. Thank you. Yeah, I guess the category of that is nervous system regulation, but what does it mean when we say that, right? Because everyone's talking about it, but I mean, Gabor Mate speaks about it really beautifully, and there's a lot of amazing somatic therapists online, and that's really the realm that I'm working with, is understanding the mind-body connection and the nervous system and how we respond. And so, for example, something I've learned about my own trauma, just to give context, is, you know, mine's even post birth, mine's in utero. And so I was born with my amygdala swollen because my mother was in a constant state of fight or flight. And so I was born anxious. I was born into the world already with this predisposition for fear and for high emotional states. And that sets someone out for the rest of their life on a really hard journey of trying to understand themselves and why they respond differently to the world. And a lot of people are born that way, in this heightened state where their brain hasn't been able to learn how to grow properly because it already started pre-birth. And so what does that mean? It means understanding that no matter how hard you try, if you're someone that's experiencing numbness and disassociation and inability to think straight or ground in your body or breathe properly, you're experiencing anxiety or you have PTSD, uh, the only way out of that is through the body, because the body has a memory. And so even if currently I'm in a state of fight or flight, it's been going on for, on and off my whole life, but particularly the last 3 years, and it comes in different waves. And my capacity to feel my pain or my grief is my capacity to heal. And that's what's so terrifying, because most people, they can't feel, it's too much. So that's why we disassociate. And that's when the state of depression comes in. It compresses the energy in our body, it compresses our organs and our nervous system. So it creates ailments and what else do we call them? Well, nervous system responses, but immunological disorders, brain disorders, all of these things. And what we really need to teach the body to do is how to feel safely. How can we feel the deep depth of our grief, our anger, our sadness safely? One, we hold societal shame around big emotions. It's scary, particularly for a woman, to feel anger, to feel grief and sadness. We compress and hold ourselves, whether it's ancestral or societal, it exists particularly in the feminine. And so a part of what I really love to teach women how to do is learning how to express freely. It doesn't have to look pretty or beautiful. You don't necessarily need the breath work, but firstly, and I think I shared this on my social media recently, is firstly, if you're at home and you're listening to this, it's like get a big, beautiful mirror and just start with mirror work and start eye gazing with yourself and seeing how vulnerable it is to see inside your own soul, because that's the first key I notice with people who are disassociated or can't feel and don't want to create connection is we all look away to grab. I often look away to grab onto content because I see it up here in the ether. But when someone can't look at you and they're constantly looking away because it's really vulnerable, that's a sign that they're never going to create deep intimacy with anyone else until they can do that with themselves. So that's phase one. Learn to eye gaze with yourself in the mirror and notice the sensations and the feeling in the body, because you have your sensations that the body makes and then you have emotions, and they can be two totally different things. And so there's this book called Come As You Are by Emily, I'm going to totally blitz her last name, Emily Nagoski. And she speaks about this concept of arousal non-concordance. And so this is where, and I use this context for everything now, and I'm sure there's a better language or word for it, but it's just the difference between what the mind is saying and the body is saying. My mind could be like, yeah, I'm feeling good, like I'm good today, like, oh yep, I can have sex, everything's great. But my nervous system in my body is having a totally different experience. I'm experiencing pain, I'm experiencing fear and compression. And so we're experiencing this on a daily, where our brain is telling us one thing and our body is telling us another. And so what I really want to teach people to do, particularly women, is come to the body. What is the body feeling? Oh, I'm feeling like you're staring at yourself in the mirror. Oh, I'm feeling really vulnerable. That sensation's creating heat in my chest. I'm feeling like my belly is like clenching. And you're bringing it down to the basics. It's almost like a yoga nidra, where you start identifying the pieces and the parts of the body that are responding, that are having sensation. That's phase one. And once you do this, you're actually starting to recognize and listen to the body's wisdom. Oh, like, I'm actually feeling really anxious. My heart is fluttering. I feel really nervous. Okay, I can give this some love and attention now, because we expect someone else to know what we want and need. And, particularly in partnership, when we can't even identify what we're feeling and what we're experiencing in the body because we've spent so long disassociating from it. So that would be just phase one. There's so much more, but once again, I'll let you drop in.
Thank you for sharing so openly and vulnerably about what has been true for you, and being able to offer that inside of the context of something actionable for our listeners, I believe, is incredibly powerful and impactful. So just want to acknowledge that. And I think this is as good a time as any just to take a brief break, and we'll come back. As the first half of our show sets in, I wanted to thank you for listening to the Smiling Human podcast. This show would not be possible without the support of listeners like you. Liking and following on YouTube, sharing with a friend, or following on your local podcast app are all easy and simple ways that you can support this show and help it grow into the future. If you do want to support this show directly, you can consider becoming a patron at patreon.com/thesmilinghuman. Patrons get perks like early access to all episodes, behind-the-scenes content, and access to live Q&As with me. If this feels within your means, then please consider becoming a patron. Now let's get back to the show. Beautiful. All right, so now as we have distilled and perhaps marinated in some of that beautiful wisdom and application that you've offered us, Anja, I would love to transition into the second half here and move into the section I like to call the question of the week. And as listeners know, this is where I invite the guest to, beforehand, think of a question or inquiry that's meaningful to them that they can bring into this space for the benefit of the listener, but also maybe the benefit of both of us as we explore it. So, Anja, what have you brought for us?
Thank you. This is a little bit on theme, and I don't know if this is too esoteric, but I've been really watching the planetary alignments and the astrology that's been moving through. And in no way do I claim to be an astrologer at all, but I think just a part of my own, feminine exploration is always looking to the stars and the skies and understanding the science behind it. And so what we're really seeing in collective, we have different placements happening around Pluto coming in for the next few years that are really going to like highlight the way that we perceive or understand relationships, not just intimately, particularly intimately, but collectively. And so I guess my question is, and perhaps this is for you because I would love to understand your answer, but obviously this is for everyone, is where do you believe we are going in terms of what people are really craving in relationship? We just spoke on this actually, so this is kind of in theme. And how do you think we might evolve into the way that we do romantic relationship with what you're kind of perceiving currently?
Wow. Amazing questions, Anja. Thank you. So the first piece, where do I see us going in terms of what people are craving in relationship? I think from the reading that I've been doing and from the work that I've been doing, that which we crave is proving itself to be quite hollow. And I'll lean back on some of the work of Charles Eisenstein. I'm reading his book, The More Beautiful World Our Hearts Know Is Possible. And he speaks about distinguishing between, well, what we perceive to be desire or craving or yearning and what is actually yearned for. And so when I look out at the world in general, I see a lot of separation, a lot of pain, and a lot of suffering, and a lot of attempts to fill the space left by separation and pain with what I would call shallow answers. So if this is food, if this is unfulfilling sexual relationships, working, television, doom scrolling, things like this. And what I'm recognizing is that the craving, if we get deeper, if we allow ourselves to peel back the layers a little bit, the craving isn't for a one-night stand or doom scrolling or likes on social media or the next television episode. The craving is for that which has always been needed and fulfilling for us. Things like a sense of belonging, a sense of safety, being seen, having our truth and our value wanted, recognized, and received by those in our community, a sense of community as well. And so the craving, I think, is not going to change until the needs are met, but the means by which we address that craving are shifting. And one of the elements that I believe is helping that shift is this injection of new language and new experience into wider circles of social interaction. So, we've been to festivals. I mean, you and I met at a festival. There's transformative festivals, there's retreats, there's all of these different types of workshops, people go into Mexico and yoga retreats and Vipassana and all these types of things. And in doing this, these ancient pillars of wisdom are fueling the discovery for new schools of thought, which I would say is actually probably a reclamation of old schools of thought into new and modern language, that are now seeding through wave and wave and wave of experience in people, these ideas and particularly language that allows us to identify what it is we're genuinely craving in contrast to what we've been using. So in the break here, which we didn't actually make the episode, but Anja and I were talking about this essence of feeling seen. And that only entered into my lexicon maybe within the last decade. You know, it's like, oh, do I feel loved? Do I feel cared for? I knew that growing up. But what does it mean to be seen, to be held, to be loved, to be accepted? What does it mean to genuinely belong? And there's a lot of work, not only in the facilitation space, but also in the art space that's exploring this. Music, films, poetry, all of these types of works are starting to revitalize and re-energize the recognition of these underlying needs such that it paints a clearer target for us to move towards. So that, I think, is what we're shifting towards, is back towards what we know to be healthy for us, because the transition is moving away from, oh yeah, this is good, to, oh, actually that's shallow and this is what we need. In the second piece, and this is maybe a deeper and more challenging question that you've offered me here, is how does that make its way into romantic relationships? What I see is primarily through media. So let me put that caveat in that sort of context around here. It's through posts from friends or posts from people that I admire, writings, videos, reels, YouTube videos, all these types of things that are only a slice of the human experience, but they are in some sense an expression and perhaps an exaggeration of some of those elements. And I see two things happening simultaneously that I think are actually one phenomenon, which is we have what appears to be this broadening divide between men and women. There's this sort of polarization in the story about what men ought to be, what women ought to be, and there's dissonance and discord inside both camps. There's projection of trauma and this vilification that plays itself out as unilateral, reductive judgment of all men or all women. And that really gets taken up as this banner that justifies pain at its core. And so this is happening on the one end. And on the other end, I see people who are really moving with curiosity and are allowing, I want to say nature, this might be the best word for it, allowing nature to lead. And if I can rope this back into what you said before we took the break, is that nervous system regulation, healing, coming back into connection with self, reclaiming power, both feminine and masculine, comes through the body. It's the body that starts to indicate to us when we are in situations that will lead us to flourishing or lead us into illness. And so the more that we have normalized practices like yoga, breath work, meditation, somatics, massage therapy, acupuncture, all of these things, you know, family constellations, what have you, more and more I see, particularly in the men's space, this inner compass clarifying. And how that plays out in terms of the change in relationships, I don't know, particularly as it relates to the style of relationships. Obviously, there's a lot of, you know, relationship anarchy or polyamory, monogamy, monogamish. You know, there's these titles that go out, and there's flag bearers for all sides, and there's arguments to be made about the detriments or positive aspects of each. And what I really hope to see, and maybe this is how I'll conclude answering your question, what I really hope to see is authentic conversations between men and women, or men and men, women and women, whomever is relating, if we're talking about romantic relationships between lovers, we'll say, about what they are bringing, how they are feeling, and what it is that they are hoping to create. Because there's no hope if we don't have a vision. And so right now, I don't think we're at the place where we have a strong enough foundation to make or create a shared vision socially. I think there's too much discord for that at the moment. And I think that in order to get there, we have to start generating shared visions in union, in partnerships, and really creating, instead of these islands of individuals and islands of creators, we now have these, archipelagos or these bigger units that come from pairing up and pairing up with a purpose. So that is how
Mm.
I would answer that. How does that land for you?
I love that. I love that. It's really well thought, actually, considering it was just asked now. Yeah, I feel like I don't have a specific answer for that either. I'm just curious. I think that's the question I've been asking everyone when I have the chance. And obviously, the realms in which I have on my social feeds, a lot of it's relational and everyone's ideas of what it means to relate and be in a relationship. And yeah, I'm just curious about, my belief systems versus someone else's, and like how strongly I believe in what my idea of relating is like divine union. And but what does that mean when you are in the tantric space and you're sharing potential eros or sexual energy, whatever you want to call it, into space with someone else? And does that make you then monogamish? And it's just all these like weird little minute things to consider about what you believe to be true for you versus someone else. And it's just so vast. It is so vastly different. And I truly believe that, love wins always, but that doesn't mean that just because love exists that that's enough. And that's what we're really learning. Um, and I think seeing as well in relation to the world that we're living in, particularly in romantic partnership, is like love can exist, but there's all these other things that don't line up and don't match up, and therefore the relationship might not be able to continue or evolve. So yeah, I don't know if there's anything else to really add to that. I think you answered it really beautifully.
Beautiful. I noticed the idea of prescriptions becoming an interesting, almost rock in the shoe for this type of conversation. And this is what you've mentioned about, what is my belief and what works best for me, and if we can actually extend that out. And I think a lot of people might shy away from making prescriptive statements or having beliefs about what kind of relationships work fundamentally. And I would encourage those who shy away from speaking about it to dig deep and to find their courage if they do have a conviction or they do have a belief. Because one thing that I've learned through my studies and through my work is that human nature, although varied, is fairly consistent across culture. And that's really helpful because it means that if we find something that functions, it's going to function for a lot of people. And so, as it
Mm.
relates to the idea of sharing energy, you mentioned, in a tantric space or in a workshop or what have you, if people are opening up their relationships, one of the pieces that I would draw attention to is the combo of why and intention, right?
Mm-hmm.
Recognizing that it is inevitable that we will be sharing our energy. I like to say that communication is non optional. We are resonating through our hearts, through our bodies, through our minds and souls with the universe all the time. That's going out. We're also receiving energy all the time
Mm.
from all of our senses, both known and unknown. And so exchange is non optional. The quality, character, and method of exchange is within our will to craft. And recognizing that how we approach that exchange will determine the kinds of ripples that it creates. As an example,
Mm.
to harken back to Charles Eisenstein, he's speaking about differentiating or actually elevating pleasure as a means of orienting. And as I'm reading it, I'm having
Mm.
this sort of like, oh man, I don't know. Like, are we talking about hedonism? Are we talking about short term gratification? Like, how are we going with this? And he addresses it beautifully, thank goodness. I continued reading the book, didn't put it down. And recognizing that there's a difference between, say, physical gratification from eating or sex or sleeping to something that is fulfilling or satiating on a soul based level. And when we
Mm.
identify those two things as distinct, I don't think it's such a far cry to actually acknowledge that one of them, if pursued, generates a greater deal of well-being, not only for yourself, but for community and society as a whole, that being the latter of the
Mm,
two, if you couldn't have guessed. And so
mm,
the work I see and the the encouragement I would offer is, if you feel compelled to gratify desire, you
mm.
might do as Anja suggested and check in with the body. How is the body feeling right now? What is actually going on? And are there ways that promote your well being over the long term that you could investigate to satiate this instead of something on the short term? So there'll just be a
Yeah,
couple pieces I would add to
yeah,
that.
yeah. That's great. There's this new idea I've been exploring. I read this book called uh, Cupid's Poison Arrow, and I can't remember the name of the woman who wrote the book, but she speaks about like parasympathetic lovemaking and this idea around not orgasming at all, because the way that orgasm responds in the brain to a man, at least that's what they've tested on scientifically now, is the same way that a man would respond to heroin. It meets the same receptors in the brain. And because of this, not as much in a man, but because they haven't done this test on a woman yet, we can't say it's exactly the same. But like, let's say it's of a similar nature. A woman's hormonal shift is so vast. If you've seen a chart of a woman's, like every week, she's basically a totally different person because of the way her hormones are going up and down and crazy. Man's testosterone, generally, think of just the average healthy man, is like this. It's just nice and clean. And a woman is like this all over the place. And so in the book, she actually suggests that not to orgasm at all, not to climax, not to, and she goes deep into this, into why. It's a great book. I highly recommend it. But the reason why I'm bringing that up is because, once again, we have this addiction to the goal, or addiction to the climax, addiction to the orgasm, addiction to the instant gratification. I'm just going to eat that extra piece of chocolate. I'm just going to, like, maybe I'll just have this one night stand, whatever the thing is for you, like whatever the thing is for everyone. And so it's the same with orgasm. And when we're coming into intimacy, is oh, like, we need to have sex so we can have the orgasm and experience the satisfaction. But really bringing it back and slowing it down and going, like, actually, how much pleasure can I have from this experience, just from like touching hands, just like this. And the idea is to bring more sensation into the body. Most people can't actually hold much sensation in the body, so they need to have like rough, fast, hard sex. Everything needs to be rougher, harder, faster. Just like some yoga practices, vinyasa, people need to go fast, fast, fast. And so, this idea of slowing everything down and coming into the state of yin in the way that you start to do your life, the way that you eat, slowing it down, chewing it consciously, you'll start to realize that the body's actually full after 20 minutes. But what do? We gun ho the food down and realize we've overeaten because we were so hungry and we didn't chew properly. So this relates to absolutely every single thing that we do. And why I keep bringing it back to sex is because, excuse my alarm, why I keep bringing it back to sex is because that's one of the things that I feel like is constantly bringing us into relationship with others, right? This constant need to feel something, to feel sexy or orgasm, have our needs met, want to feel loved, whatever the thing is. And so, a part of the invitation of what I teach women is, how can you create deep intimacy? Because intimacy starts with communication, right? It starts with conversation. It starts with how you treat each other for the whole day. That is when the intimacy starts. That's when the turning each other on starts. It doesn't start when you just decide to get into the bedroom. And so it really starts to become this idea of, how do we make love with life? How do we find pleasure in the way that we eat, in the way that we breathe, in the way that we move, the way that we wear our clothes? Because everything creates sensation in the body. Everything creates a reaction. It doesn't necessarily mean it's always emotional or have an emotion attached to it, but it creates sensation. And so, how can we slow things down and start really drawing in every element of our existence, so that when we do get to the sex, you're so heightened and you're so present in your body, you can feel the subtleties of like your skin touching and the breath, and you don't need to like go harder, faster, longer, stronger just to get somewhere. And I think that's kind of what I'm desiring to see in the way that we relate, not just with ourselves, but with everything around us in our existence, is the slowness, is falling in love with the slowness. What does it mean to like re-fall in love with your partner again and like take them out on a date and get to know them again? Oh, it's been a few months. I don't really know what's going on in my partner's life. We just sleep next to each other and we go about our day, and then we expect to come home and have sex and be all intimate, but you don't even know what's going on in each other's hearts. And so, yeah, how to keep re-falling in love with life and slowing it down and taking those steps to really feel into the subtlety and the sensation to reignite the energy in your body so that you can hold more energy, so you can have bigger orgasms, so you can have more pleasure, so you can feel more connected and more attuned with yourself.
Rich and vibrant wisdom, as always, Anja. Thank you. Now, as we reach the tail end of our episode here, I'm sure that there's many ears and hearts that have been sparked with curiosity for the pieces that you've offered forward. If there are women out there in listening land who want to connect with you and learn more about what you do, where can they find you?
Thank you. Yeah, I would say my Instagram is probably the best place. I am Anja Rose. And I mean, you can find my email on there. I'm reworking my website, so that'll probably take a few more months, but that's probably the best way.
Excellent. And of course, all of that will be in the show notes and the description as well. Anja, thank you so much for your offerings, for your time, and for speaking with me today.
Pleasure. Thank you, Oak.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Smiling Human podcast. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking and subscribing on YouTube or giving a follow on your local podcast app. I know I said it in the mid-roll, but I'll say it again. If you'd like to support this show directly, you can do so at patreon.com/thesmilinghuman. You'll gain access to perks like early access to episodes, behind-the-scenes content, as well as access to live Q&As. Also, I've just produced an insight journal and I want to give it to you for free. You can find access to this month-long personal development journal in the link below. This is in the show notes or in the YouTube description. Also, if you feel inspired by the sharing that has taken place in conversations like this and you want to work with me directly, you can find a link to a free call below. Thanks so much for listening. We'll see you again.